Are you considering which of these three languages to learn? French, Italian, or Spanish? Which might be easier for an English speaker? Well, everyone's different, so I can't say for certain, but this is a brief overview. My main language these days is Italian, so let's start with comparing that to the other two. How close is Italian to French and Spanish? Well, Wikipedia quotes Ethnologue on this matter. I tried to verify this, but I think that information is behind a wall. Anyway, it says that there's an 89% lexical similarity to French and an 82% similarity to Spanish. That's both not a lot and quite a bit of difference. So, Italian and French, even though they don't sound the same, have closer vocabulary and grammar than Italian and Spanish. To be honest, Italian has a lot of words in common with both languages, but Italian and French go their own way when they don't overlap with Spanish. What do I mean by that? Well, to speak. Parlare in Italian, parle in French, and hablar in Spanish. To eat is mangiare in Italian, manger in French, and comer in Spanish. There is loro in Italian, leur in French, and sus in Spanish. However, when you've studied all three, it's obvious that both French and Spanish are closer to English than Italian. French is estimated to have a 27% lexical similarity, but when you add in Latin, which influences French, it's about double that. I don't really understand why that isn't just added in automatically, but there must be a reason. The best estimate I could find for Spanish is 30 to 40% similarity. I couldn't easily find an estimate for Italian to English, but I suspect it's lower than Spanish, probably close to that Latin similarity. But does this mean that French is the easiest language to learn for English speakers? Lots of people say so, but I think I'd have to disagree. It's not all about similarity of words and grammar. It's about pronunciation. It's all very well being able to construct a sentence, but if you can't say it, that's a problem. French pronunciation is further from English than Spanish is. Plus, Spanish has very specific rules about pronunciation, which once you've learned them, first deciding on European Spanish or the Spanish of the Americas, of course, you're pretty much set with pronunciation. Yes, there are some difficult sounds to master, as there are in all languages, but I'd argue that French sounds are far more difficult for an English speaker. And, unfortunately, Italian has the worst of both worlds. The different sounds are more difficult than the Spanish ones, probably on a par with French. There are fewer overlapping words with English, and the pronunciation is far less regular than you might be led to believe, because there are so many words that defy the so-called stress rules. Seriously, so many. For me, having learned French in my youth, learning Italian turned out to be relatively easy, even after the huge gap in years. What would it have been like if I hadn't learnt any French? Just like any first language, difficult. But if you know French, Italian might be your best bet for a second language, if you have no considerations other than wanting to learn another language. There are a lot of similarities, but because they are pronounced totally differently, I found it quite easy to keep them apart. But French would still help with learning Spanish. There are still a lot of overlaps, a 75% lexical similarity, but they just might not seem so obvious, because there are less of them and because of the pronunciation differences. If you have learned Italian or Spanish already, is it wise to learn the other one next? This one's more difficult. Yes, there are a lot of similarities. That 82% we mentioned earlier. But the pronunciation is quite similar, which in some ways makes the similarities a problem. Now, when refreshing my Spanish, I did that from Italian as a way to kind of bully my brain into noticing the differences, and I think it's largely worked so far. So that's one option. The other option could be to watch my video on hacking Spanish from Italian, which you'll find here.